Hi, my name is Tim Brown and this is the second video in our How to Create Your First Visual Design for Web Design video series. And the second video is essentially going to be editing a student's version of what I just did and giving some pointers and some feedback on things that might be common pitfalls that you're coming across when you're visually designing your first website. And let's get to it. Alright, so we have the student's example here, and think we've got locks on these layers, so I'm going to unlock these layers here. And for the sake of our example, we had this as GeoGrotesque, and I don't know if he had that font. So we'll switch that to GeoGrotesque, kind of get a little bit of in the vein of what we're going for. So some pieces that I want you to think about are, if you have different pieces of text or elements, you want them to be lined up, either left aligned or center aligned. I really prefer left aligned because it's easier to read text when it's left aligned. And in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and align everything to the left here so you can kind of see what I mean. Let's align some stuff. We're aligning it left and making it feel a little bit more organized, making it feel a little bit more intentional. It's a really big piece of web design. You want it to feel intentional, and you want it to serve whatever purpose you're trying to do, right? So in this particular case, I'm actually going to make this logo a little, we can mess with this logo, make it a little smaller so that it fits into the spot. And one other thing that I might think about is on these buttons, you definitely want to have space around the text. I don't know if that's something that you might have come across too, but you want to have space so that it feels like there's breathing room for the text. And that's a good concept in general. You don't have to fill every piece of space on your website. And in fact, if you create a website that has open areas, you'll notice that your website might feel a little bit more high-end. And it's something I strongly suggest. So give yourself the opportunity to create intentionally blank places in the website. Not everywhere, of course. We want it to serve our purpose. We want it to be intentional. We want it to accomplish what we're trying to do. And in this case, I think that another big problem with this design, let's not call it a big problem, let's call it an opportunity for learning, is there's a lot of text up here at the top. And we want somebody, when they come to a site for the first time, to just have an intro. We don't want to give them all the information right away. We want to be inviting, and we want to essentially create the design in such a way that they're kind of invited to learn more. So by only giving them like a sentence or two underneath your headline, it's not intimidating, and they're more likely to potentially read just those two sentences. And if they read those two sentences, they're more likely to read deeper paragraphs later on the page. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to use Illustrator's paragraph function up here, and I'm going to turn off hyphenate because I don't like those lines in between words or in the middle of words. Another thing that I want you to think about is that these hero sections should not be so long that you can't see the next section. So in this case, you can see it goes pretty long here. If we were zoomed in and this was in a browser, that we might only see this much, right? We might only see this much of the design. And in that way, that might be a little bit, the problem with that is what I'm getting at, is that somebody might assume that that's where the page ends. Because there are websites where all they show you is that top area and you actually can't scroll. So some people, maybe a little bit less web savvy, people than you or I might assume that that's the end of the page. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that this other section is visible. And in this case, there's a piece of artwork in the background. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that up a little bit as there's kind of sky in the artwork, and so it's still the main part is visible. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pull these pieces, let's say this guy, let's say these, let's bring these bad boys up here, these buttons with a little bit more space around them, and align to the left here, kind of tweaking as we go along. What I want to do, I'm going to look at our layers. I actually want to lift this section up here above these other layers so that I can pull it up and have it on top. So that if you were zoomed in and this was all you could see in the browser, that first section would, or that second section would be peeking out. So I'm actually pulling everything up. So that it's bumping up on the bottom of the browser. So if somebody was right here, they could see that there's another section. Another trick to do there might even include an arrow. Maybe a circle with an arrow right here. So you're kind of indicating. That's called a visual cue. So a visual cue to scroll. And don't be ashamed of arrows and photos of people pointing at elements and things like that. It's just part of our job as a web designer, as a visual designer, is to be a little bit of a psychologist and to essentially make things as easy as possible for people to do. And you know, one of my favorite books, maybe this would be great reading for you if you're getting into web design, is called Don't Make Me Think by Stephen Krug. And you can get that on Amazon. Maybe I'll include it in the description. It's a wonderful book that essentially says people do not want to think when they come to your website. They want everything to be extremely obvious. And that calls back to why we have these two buttons here. We want to indicate what people are to do on this page. And in this case, hey, here's an opportunity for improvement here with this design. Do we want people just to read about you, or do we want people to contact you? If you're spending all this time and effort creating a website for yourself, I think that you're more likely to want somebody to actually reach out to you, whether it's for business or to collaborate or what have you. So what I would consider here is to make one of these buttons your contact button. So maybe instead of, I think the first two actions somebody would take on your website are to see your portfolio. Let's say if it's not built into the homepage. If it was built into the homepage, maybe I would just use the about there. And since this button is a little bit more bold, I might make that one the contact button. And you want to make buttons occasionally that either have something different on them, like let's say, I don't bite, or something, kind of nudging, a little less corporate-esque or what have you. It's an opportunity to be a little bit more creative if you want. Or they should have they should be able to finish the sentence, I want to, or they want to. So they want to contact me. And in that way, you're kind of inviting them to, contact me or contact you. So in this case, once again, up at the top here, what do we have? We have the portfolio as the main action. And what I'm suggesting here is we want this action at the top. We don't want it to just be anything. We want it to be the primary action that you want somebody to take on the site. So in the end, what I want somebody to take on the site, the end goal. Think about it this way. What's the end goal? So you either want it, a lot of times it's shop, or a lot of times it's contact me for companies, because we either want a lead or we want them, like a lead is in a sales lead to be able to contact them and to be able to sell to them, or we want them to actually just purchase something. So this is the end goal that we want somebody to take on this site. So in this case, let's say contact me, and then let's put portfolio here. And what's the other thing we need to do on this button up at the top? We need to give it a little bit more space around the edges, because we don't want that text in the middle to be claustrophobic. So if you, in this case, we want the border radius for each of these buttons to match each other. So in this case, if you see this button's more rounded than this button, we either want them all to be round, like this one, or we want them all to be essentially a rounded rectangle like this one. We don't want to have two different styles of buttons here in their what would be called border radius if you got into the code. But let's just say the radius now. So I can look at the radius in Illustrator by clicking on this button and going to shape, and I see it's a border radius of 13.21. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to put it into this one. So I'm clicking on that button, I'm clicking shape, and I'm changing this border radius to 13.1. All right. So now we have this button looking a little bit like the other button. And in this case, this is a different red too. So what I would also consider, if you are, you want to create something that feels cohesive. So always make sure you have the same styles as much as possible. So in this case, we switched this one over to that darker red as well. And I'm gonna say I don't think that this button needs a edge, or a stroke. So I'm gonna click stroke down here on this toolbar. I'm gonna click none, and same thing here. Click that stroke and then click none. And then this thing needs a little bit more space, just necessarily because it's the item right before the button. So I'm spacing it over and doing it that way. Now we want this navigation to be vertically aligned within that nav bar. So I'm going to pull this stuff up right to the very vertical center of this nav bar. You always want it to be vertically centered in this case. And so a couple things I'll think about. Some of this boils down to just taste, right? And you get better taste as you do it. Honestly, you might have great taste right now, but you might not be able to apply that taste in a visual design just because you're not used to the mechanics of it, and you're not used to maybe some of the conventions, or you just haven't studied it a lot. So in this case, let's just tweak a little things for taste. And as you know, some of this stuff is subjective, but I'm going to tweak stuff for my taste, and maybe you'll learn a little something from it in the process. So I'm going to bring this is not taste. We need left aligned. We want this all to be left aligned. But in this case, I don't like a mid value, especially when we're trying to create contrast between sections. So I actually I would like this to be either white or dark. I really don't care that much. In my case, yes, my visual preference would be probably more along the lines of white. And maybe if you really want something this gray, to just touch it down a little bit, and then you have this light gray area versus like that mid gray. It's, I like a lot of contrast, so that's a taste thing, but maybe that's interesting to you. I actually realized that because I want these buttons to line up, I'm actually going to create I do want the stroke. I decided to change my opinion here. You're allowed to do that. I'm going to add the stroke here, and I'm gonna as a color, and I'm gonna make it a 3-point stroke so that it matches the height of this one with the stroke. And just as I want all buttons to have the same kind of visual design convention, I'm gonna do that up here as well. My taste would be that this button wouldn't be a red outline. I think it would be white. It's not super important, like I said, but just because it creates a greater contrast between the foreground, the button, and the background, the picture. My taste would put this kind of up a little closer to the headline, and to give it just a little bit of a kind of a, proximity is a way to make things feel like they go together. So that's one way to kind of group things, is to make them very close. And let's go. And then, so essentially we have a somewhat tweaked design from that original design. And I'm going to go ahead and save it, and we'll do side by side just for 1 second. And if you think about all the time that it took, I think, for me to come up with essentially a style of my own, it will take you time to come up with a visual design style of your own. There are some things like left aligned or center aligned, and some things like space around buttons, and some things like making sure that the second section is visible before scrolling, that are going to be more rules and things that you should actually really consider when you're designing, for sure. And then there are other things that you'll develop a style over time. And in this case, whatever things that fall into that, some of it's color. I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't choose red as my main color on this. I love blue. And blue and green are really commonly liked colors by a lot of people. But there's obviously some really solid visually designed websites that use red as a primary color, that use yellow as a primary color, that use purple as a primary color. So it can be done very well. Some of this will be your taste, and I invite you to dive in and be careful to, follow some visual design conventions for things like alignment and space, and then learn what your style is and slowly form that over time. And I'm excited for you, and I'm looking forward to sharing how to get into these second and third sections on the next visual design for website design tutorial. See you next time.